Thank you. We will now resume proceedings of Finance Committee. Everyone please be seated. Turning now to consider the appropriations for the Cabinet Office. We will now consider appropriation CBO 1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy, $851,446 found on page 48 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? CBO 1, page 48. Development and Coordination of Government Policy for $851,446. If there are no questions, we will proceed to vote. All those in favor of CBO 1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy for $851,446, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. CBO 2, Cabinet Support and Servicing for $696,650, found on page 49. Are there any questions? All those in favor of CBO 2, Cabinet Support and Servicing, $696,650, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
CBO 9, Protocol Services, $461,463, found on page 50. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, then all those in favor of CBO 9, Protocol Services, $461,463, found standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination, $128,115, found on page 51. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I need to ask, is this just for the Protocol Office or just for the Cabinet Office, or is this the coordination throughout the whole service?
Mr. Rose, could you please state your full name and title for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Samuel Rose, Cabinet Secretary. And Mr. Chair, if I may answer the member, or just if I have it correct, member, you're referring to FOI or protocol? What? FOI. Okay. Data Protection Coordination. Okay. Mr. Chair, this appropriation is for the Freedom of Information Unit, which still remains within the Cabinet Office. That is obviously different from the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. So we provide assistance and advice to information managers, the Freedom of Information managers, and training, etc. And the individual also was part of the data protection working group.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, is there a follow-up question?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, if that is so, I need to ask if information officers are, throughout government that is now, are trained to, one, utilize the 1 month that they have to answer the question and then ask for extensions, and then provided on the last day of the second month.
Mr. Rose?
Mr. Chair, we're not trained to do that, sir. FOI managers are not trained by the ICO or the Freedom of Information Unit to do that.
Thank you. Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I really didn't think so, but I needed to have it said publicly. Why is it then that every time you ask for information, they ask for an extension, they tell you they, in accordance with the law, they're going to, they are required to answer in 30 days, but they can extend it for 60, and then on the last day they do it. Why do they do that?
Mr. Rose, if you can answer.
And I mean at 5 o'clock in the evening too, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I'm not in a position to answer for every FOI manager or every request that comes across. Like, I'm quite sure that the statistics, actually the statistics could be provided to the member, and that could show the response times in general. I think the ICO might be able to provide that information. But in my office's case, I know there are many FOI requests that are responded to long before the deadline. So I know there are situations where the requests do take some time to respond to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. It's me? Is that what you said? What you said? Oh. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate if the information being sought is archived. I understand that. But information that is current, and they still take the 60 days, when you appeal that 30 days to the chief officer, the chief officer don't respond. Is that how it's supposed to go? Well, I'm only asking here, Mr. Chairman, because the Cabinet Office is the one who's training all these officers. Is that the usual way of doing these things? You appeal to the chief officer who is in charge of that information officer, which you are allowed to do under the law, and the chief officer does not respond. Now, I'm wondering if that's the usual way. Is it the chief officer respond to the person, or to the information officer, or the applicant? Or should they?
Mr. Rose?
Mr. Chair, through you, the chief officer's involvement would normally come at the point of what they refer to as internal review. So if the manager has denied the request at the initial stage, then there is an opportunity for the applicant to ask the chief officer to review that initial decision. Now, if the chief officer has been involved in the initial decision, they should then recuse themselves from it, and it would then go to the ICO in the form of an appeal. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, in general, that's the process it takes.
Mr. Chairman, it is when the person requires an additional month. Okay, let me give you an example. I applied to the Minister for Works Ministry. Within 48 hours, they responded and said they had received it, and they are allowed 30 days to answer it, but they're allowed an extra 30 days, so I could expect it in 60 days. I asked for an internal review of the chief of the chief officer. The chief officer has yet to respond to me. On 5 o'clock on the 60th day, I received the information I wanted. Is what should have happened? Should I have received a response from that chief officer on the review that I asked for?
Mr. Rose.
Mr. Chair, can I ask the member whether he did receive, what was the final response that he actually received from the chief officer? Did he get the information that he originally requested?
I appealed for a review of the extra 30 days to the chief officer. The chief officer, up until now, unless he's responding right now, because he's used to that, has not responded to that. And on the 60th day, I received from the information officer the information I requested.
Mr. Rose.
Mr. Chair, so if I'm understanding clearly, you were concerned that the information manager asked you or asked for an additional 30 days. That was your initial concern, and the member's initial concern, and then he appealed that or raised that concern with the chief officer that an additional 30 days was being asked for. In general, what we train information managers to do, Mr. Chair, is to work with the applicants, to try to keep them informed and to let them know what is entailed in actually getting the information, in providing the information. There are instances where, I think as the member has noted, there will be extenuating circumstances which requires additional time. And so the additional time is granted for under the law. It would be difficult for me to say whether or not an information manager was acting incorrectly in asking for an additional 30 days because it is provided for. So as long as the response was provided within the 60 days, and of course as an applicant, and the applicant has a right to ask why it's taking additional 30 days, and the best practice is to keep your applicant informed as to why you're looking for an additional 30 days. But to say that anything is actually wrong with taking 60 days is provided for under the law, although we are encouraged and trained to provide information as quickly as possible, and in most cases it actually is. But I'm sure between the ICO and the FOI unit we could provide some information on response times in general across the board.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the 60 days if it is warranted, and at the 25th day maybe they ask for the extension of the initial request, but it was asked for immediately, and I wrote the chief officer for an internal review. I am asking, should the chief officer respond to that request?
Mr. Rose.
While I don't have the law in front of me, Mr. Chair, I think just as a general best practice, it's always good to communicate with applicants and to respond. So, I don't have the information in front of me in terms of internal review, but just as a general best practice, it's always good to respond, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, any further questions?
No, I'm trying to climb up a lime tree backwards here.
Fortunately, that's just a figure of speech. I would hope you've never tried to do so. Let us then proceed to vote on this particular appropriation. So all those in favor of CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination for $128,000, $115, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. CBO 17, information services provided to other government agencies, $1,101,611, found on page 52 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, is this where we make provisions for the cameras in LA?
Mr. Rose?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If CIGTV and GIS are covered by these appropriations.
No.
Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chair, do we have a protocol on how cameras are to be used in this chamber? And what is to be recorded and when and how?
Please state your name and title for the record.
Chief Information Officer Suzette Ebanks of Government Information Services.
Thank you.
The question, Mr. Chair, I think is concerning a protocol for the use of cameras in the LA.
Mr. McLean, is that the correct question? Yes, ma'am, it is.
Of television cameras. Since this was last raised, we have done a search of records from CIGTV before it was moved to GIS. It is our understanding that something was developed. We have never been able to find it, and we are moving to the stage now where I think we will put together our own, Mr. Chair. That's the status at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it the intent to have the House Committee involved in the development of protocols for this Parliament?
I would expect so, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is that they were installed at the on the initiative of the House Committee, not the current House Committee, but the House Committee at the time. So I would expect that any protocols that are developed would be done in conjunction with the House Committee. That would just be logical.
Well, why I asked that, she said that GIS is going to develop one. So I'm just trying to ensure that the members of Parliament has the opportunity, which it is done in any other country in the world. It is Parliament that decides how cameras are operated and in Parliament. And I look forward to that because the members of the House Committee, I was going to bring it up as an agenda item and shortly. So right now, it is free for all and all for free. That whoever operates the cameras here do as they please.
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't describe it as a free-for-all. Obviously, as Government Information Services is the parent department of SIGTV, and our concern is to make all arms of the public sector look as good as possible. So our news director our newly appointed news director has strived to lay down certain verbal policies with our TV staff in terms of to make sure that public sector is represented as well as we can manage in the situation.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, but it is important that we get this in place as soon as possible. It is extremely important that we get this in place as soon as possible. That's without any disrespect to anyone. There needs to be clear lines, clear protocols as to how cameras are used and record what is recorded in this parliament. And in the absence thereof, we may very well have some concerns, or members in here may have some concerns about it. And, you know, whilst it is the public, GIS is for the public service, we are not really the public service. So we need to be separated from that. Anyway, the other question I have is, when is this going to be made free? GTV, I think it is. Because, and let me explain, because this is the House of Parliament, the House of the people, and it should be made available free of cost to these people. And besides, I just see where, and I don't know if I should bring this up here, but I just see where ICTA is talking about television, and it's local content. I don't know what they're asking people about that for, but because provisions are that each provider provide at least one channel free. So when are we going to do GITV as free for the people of this country?
Mr. Chair, if I may answer this question, we fully support the view shared by the member. It is our desire to see CIGTV available over the air. It's presently offered on one of the local cable providers, that's Westar, and that was the original agreement signed with Westar, provided for a free service, the channel being provided free to subscribers to Westar. The over-the-air option was not included in the original deal, but that deal expires this year, and we are looking at additional options right now and proposals for carrying CIGTV live over the air. And if I may, by extension, I've also received representations from the Deputy Premier and Madam Speaker, who have also requested that we try to ensure that it's available in Cayman Brac as well. So these are things that we are actually looking at, because we support the view shared by the member that this should be available to all members of the community.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that with this CIG TV, I think it is, GTV, is that there doesn't seem to be sufficient programming to keep it going 24/7. And in the meantime, we're putting fillers in there for different things. What is being done about that? Where many times I turn it on and I see a band playing or something of that nature, just as a filler, I believe that they're called. Is there any are there any plans to do like educational programs that may be rerun, and programs on the country? I know you have news every now and again, but are there any plans to do like educational programs for this channel? Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to do both that and CB21 at the same time, because the questions that I have look like I'm the only one asking the questions, so ties in together here. So
That would make sense, Mr. McLean. So we will also consider CBO 21, broadcasting of public information and on-air programs for $1,047,644 found on page 54. We will consider both appropriations at this time together. It's on. It's on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will ask the Chief Information Officer to answer the rest of the question, but in a nutshell, the member should be aware that the main issue with our content, we are limited in our content at this point in time because of a sponsorship issue. The agreement that we presently have with Westar prevents us from broadcasting anything that in essence would take away sponsored or paid for sponsorship from Westar. So in essence, there are many programs or content that might have been sponsored by a corporate sponsor, what have you, that we are not allowed to air under the terms of the current agreement. As I mentioned, that agreement will expire in November, but I'll allow the Chief Information Officer to provide additional information.
My apologies. We are also aggressively trying to go out and to film and then to shoot and then to play back any public education events that are going on around the community. In the past 2 weeks, as an example alone, we've covered the NCFA performances extensively, and our intention is to play those back on CIGTV. Yesterday evening, we actually did two. We did Weathering the Storm at the Public Library, which was a part of the National Trust Lecture Series, and we also covered the Young Musician of the Year event. And our plan is to aggressively plan to cover events like those to help to fill the programming gap.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, I'll take one more question from you then. Mr. Eden was waiting for a while to ask a question. Mr. Connolly, and then Mr. McTaggart.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I have many other questions, but anyway.
We'll share the time. I'll come back to you.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, one of the questions that I really need to know, why aren't we broadcasting, what's they call it, simulcast with Radio Cayman. That's why I asked to put those two together, Mr. Chairman. In all the countries I've ever been to, if people don't listen to you on the TV, or they're not in the environment to look at the TV, they have a little radio someplace there, like on construction sites and the this and the that. And why aren't we doing that? That was one of the things that the Premier might remember, that our dearly departed friend, the Speaker, was always on top of that, which we tried, but we were unsuccessful. Live. I don't know who could answer that.
Well, let me take a stab at it, new as I am at this particular game, but we had perhaps an off-the-cuff discussion, the director of broadcasting and myself, just by chance, about similar sorts of issues just very recently. And we've agreed to sit down and talk about a range of things with this as we try to gear up to get the government message out to as many people as we possibly can in the best possible way we can, using GIS, using Radio Cayman, and using CIGTV. But Radio Cayman has, in Grand Cayman anyhow, two stations, 89.9 and 105.3. The 105.3 is essentially easily, well, I can't know if we can call it easy listening music, but it's there's a lot less interruptions is the wrong word. Not just commercials, but other programming other than the music, and it's designed in that way. And 89.9 is where all of the other programs get carried. Of course, there's some music content in that. So if for instance, while the House is sitting now, or Finance Committee is sitting, we had to devote 89.9 exclusively to that coverage, all of that other programming content is gone. And that's where Radio Cayman makes, most of its money in terms of revenue. So those kinds of considerations come into play.
But, Mr. Chairman, certainly we have two channels. There was I don't remember the name of the equipment, but we were purchasing, when I was there, synchronizing equipment between Grand Cayman and Cayman Brac to utilize the stations up and get broadcasts up there. Why can't we use 105.3?
Because if you use 105.3, you'd cancel out the whole of the easy listening content for the period that you'd be covering this.
Absolutely.
Not everybody's as keen to listen to the work of the Legislative Assembly as you might think.
And there are more than you think, I believe. But that's besides the point now.
What I'm saying is that while what Mr. Chairman, through you, while what you, Mr. McLean, is saying is ideally what we'd like to do, to simulcast the proceedings here, CIGTV and Radio Cayman. I'm saying that what I've explained are important factors in deciding what we do, because we're going to lose significant revenue immediately we go down that course. And Radio Cayman has lots of competition for those commercial dollars.
Thank you. Mr. Eden, followed by Mr. Conley, then Mr. McTaggart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLean from East End touched on some of the regards to CIG TV, and after the director spoke, I had a better understanding, because I only watch it very rarely, but it just seems so muddled up. One minute you got someone talking from the Parliament, and next thing is on there, but I understand that this is in the early stages, and to back up what member from East End was talking about, in the early days when this was first talked about bringing online, it was said that it was going to be free to the public, and I'm not a subscriber to the, whatever that call it, cable TV, so I don't see it unless I go to somebody's house. But I have a better understanding, and it's good to know that they're going to try to get the programming sorted out, because when I do watch it, it just seems to be in New York, those people jumping up and down and this and that, and next thing just over and over and over and over, with all due respect. There's some other things I'll come to later on when we get to Radio Cayman, but just that.
We can also discuss. Okay, we're discussing the two together, Mr. Eden. We're discussing broadcasting, CBO 21, broadcasting and public information on air programs, which would be Radio Cayman.
Okay, and once again, not to be critical, but this is something I bring up several finance committees in regards to the news on Radio Cayman, specifically around midday in the morning. I understand the evening when it's quite extensive, goes to an hour, but what I call the sound bites, 15, 20 seconds long, and then, especially in the morning, and they ramble off to regional news and what's happening in Europe and UK. I don't want to hear about what's happening up there. If I want to hear that, I go to the channel or watch it on TV, and I would just beg that there's so many things happening in Cayman that we could fill this up with, instead of just, plug it in some other station or something else and just repeating it. and this is not to be critical, and I know we're still in the embryonic stage of Radio Cayman developing, and they've done a marvelous job in most things, but that is one of the areas that I also would like to see covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. Mr. Connolly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. It occurred to me because just sitting in the ministry that I sit in, we've had a number of young Caymanian talent come through and offer to do various videos, etc. And we observed one, I think it was the family unit, where it was called Boys Voice. It was showcasing questions posed to school-age boys who then, talked very openly and frankly on those. It seems to me that we could kill two birds with one stone. People that are doing that sort of inspirational educational videos, government TV could showcase our young Caymanian talent, and whereas to expose them and to give them a sort of canvas to speak from.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. Rose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That, again, we would fully support that. Being a creative person myself, I do look out for the needs of other creative artists in the community, and I fully support this as an avenue, again, where we could run into some issues presently under the terms of this contract, is where that content may have been sponsored by someone. So as long as it hasn't been officially sponsored, we don't have a problem with that. Unfortunately, it's just the terms of the contract that we presently have. But I'm sure that the Chief Information Officer and the CIGTV team would be happy to review some of those videos, and we can add them to our content.
Thank you. Mr. McTaggart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. CBO 17, just for clarification, you said that this was included both GIS and CIGTV, the cost of operating of those two entities?
Mr. Chair, through you, CBO 17 is strictly for GIS, which also encompasses CIGTV. So Radio Cayman is not included under that one.
Okay. CBO 21, is this the full cost of operating Radio Cayman?
Mr. Chair, this figure here is not the full cost because it's also funded by third-party revenue. So, but this is what is government's purchasing from Radio Cayman.
This is the actual cost of the government, not the actual cost of running the operation.
Actual cost of the government, correct.
Do we know the actual? So what we would add revenue to government's cost, and that would be the actual cost of the operation. Do we know that? I think that's what Mr. McTaggart is getting.
Well, I would get around, would want to know that information. Typically, I think we've seen with other votes where that information was included at the bottom.
Right.
What the related revenue was, it's offset the cost.
That is on page
And it can be provided later.
52. It's not there.
52
52 and 54.
and 54.
Mr. McTaggart, they will undertake to provide that for us in writing.
That's fine, sir.
Yes, sir. Are there any further? Mr. McLean, you had more questions? We said we would come back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if anyone can tell us if there has been any offers to purchase Radio Cayman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware that any formal offers have been made.
Has any informal offers been made?
I'm not aware of any informal offers. What I do know from personal experience is that indications have been given of an interest to purchase the station.
May I ask by whom?
Those that have been made to me, I'd rather not say.
Mr. McLean, is there a follow?
May I ask the director?
Mr. Chairman, we have not been approached.
Before you answer, please state your full name and title for the record.
Norma Macfield, Director of Broadcasting.
Thank you.
And no, Mr. Chairman, we have not been approached by anyone to purchase Radio Cayman.
Thank
Any
you.
verbal expressions?
Mr. McLean, I think your three previous questions would have still covered the one you just asked, whether it was verbal or handwritten. You asked a pretty general question previously.
Well, I had to squeeze it out of the premier, so maybe I need to squeeze it out of her too.
I will ask one question that encompasses all possibilities. Have you received any written or oral approaches to purchase Radio Cayman?
No, sir, we haven't.
Okay. Mr. McLean, is there another question?
No, the other one has been answered with regards to the revenue that I wanted to know, the revenue of Radio Cayman, and if we can get it broken down by station. That's my question. If we can get the revenue broken down by station.
You mean by frequency?
We have two stations, don't we? Yeah, 105 and 8 and 9.9.
Those are frequencies.
Two frequencies, yeah.
Mr. Chair, if it pleases the member, we'll be happy to provide that in writing to him.
Thank you.
And the other thing, Mr. Chairman, is I don't know of any additional radio frequencies being used. I guess the member, the minister responsible would have to tell us that, I5CTA. But when I left there were a number of left unused, albeit the separation was a little too close because of how we had messed it up initially. The separation of the frequencies by at least three frequencies it should be, and they were like 2 or something like that, where you get transfers over. If that's the case, that one of them can be secured from ICTA, that may be a better answer to broadcasting Parliament. Dedicated channel, yes. But it was kind of close.
Thank you. Mr. Panan, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a question, I suppose, and depending on the answer or request. One of the complaints I've heard about CIG-TV is that there's never an indication of exactly when various types of programming is being scheduled. I'm not sure how accurate that complaint is, but if that is the case, I think it would be very helpful from the public's perspective if there could be at least some regular indications of the programming content so that they would better be able to observe what they want to observe.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we're limited by our budget in terms of advertising. There are free channels that free avenues of advertising that we're looking to take up, and possibly perhaps a very small expenditure to put out the word of what is on when. At the moment, we are advertising our PM programming internally to the civil service and on our social media pages.
Thank you. Mr. Panton, does that answer your question, or is there something you'd like to elaborate on?
Just for clarity then, what I was actually referring to was a page or a screen which shows periodically what the programming content is. Because, for example, when people want to watch proceedings of the LA, they would like to know when certain days are being played, for example, or replayed, so that they can watch it. These are just observations that have been and questions that have been put to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Panton.
Mr. Chair, that's certainly something we'll look to do.
Thank you. If there are no further questions with respect to these two appropriations, we will now proceed to vote on those. So all those in favor of CBO 17, information services provided to other government agencies for $1,101,611, and CBO 21, broadcasting of public information and on-air programs for $1,047,644, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and the administration of the Premier's office, $729,890, found on page 53 of the annual plan and estimates. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, all those in favor of CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and the administration of the Premier's office, $729,890, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, no. OE 5, constituency allowance, $654,300, found on page 289 of the annual plan and estimates.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hugh.
Mr. Chairman, through you, could I get an explanation on what the rationale is, the rationale behind the current system of the issuing of constituency allowances?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I will try my best to address the constituency allowance arrangements which were transferred to the Office of the Premier during this financial year. The existing system employed is that of a monthly allowance paid to each member of the Legislative Assembly, as opposed to a system based on reimbursement for expenses incurred, which is used in other places. So at the beginning of their terms, I believe each MLA would have agreed with the clerk of the Legislative Assembly a rate of allowance, which is then paid on a monthly basis without the need for MLAs to provide receipts of their expenses. Well, it should be noted that in other Commonwealth and European countries, the system employed is called subventions, or government subsidies to political parties. So there's never been any suggestion to adopt either a reimbursement or a subvention method of payment. Instead, we have sought to improve the system of allowances currently employed. So the maximum amount payable to an MLA under the current system is $4,000 per month. That is basically broken down into $2,000 a month for office expenses and $2,000 a month for staff or secretarial support. 1,500, I believe 1,500 of which is for actual rent, and then the other 500 is for utilities and other expenses that go along with running that, running the office.
Sorry, just for clarification, did you say that the maximum amount was that paid or payable?
Payable.
Payable. Thank you.
And so an MLA who's working in an office by themselves then could receive up to $4,000 for the constituency allowance for the month. What the government has done, or what I guess has been the practice here, has been that many of those costs are actually shared, where two or more MLAs are sharing an office space. So what's currently happening, if two MLAs are sharing an office, they would receive about 72% of that maximum $4,000, which works out to about $2,875 per month. That's where two MLAs are sharing the same office. Where three MLAs are sharing an office, which I believe is the case in West Bay, they receive about 60% of that maximum, which is $2,400 per month. And then where four MLAs are sharing, which is the case with the Georgetown, some of the Georgetown and the Bordentown members, they are receiving, I believe, $2,000 per month, which is 50% of that maximum total. So the just for some context, the total amount spent on constituency allowances remains $654,300. And I think, just for further context, if each member were to take up an individual office, that would actually cost the country a total of $960,000. So there have been no proposals or requests to increase this amount in this upcoming year, although I'm made to understand that rents have actually gone up. So,
just for the sake of clarity, you said where two MLAs share an office and three MLAs share an office. What are those figures again?
We're 2875 and 2400, respectively, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And what's the 2400? What percentage was that? 60. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions with respect to this appropriation? Thank you. If there are no further questions, then we will proceed to vote on this appropriation. So all those in favor of OE 5, constituency allowance, $654,300, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. Ladies and gentlemen, this takes us to the end of our proceedings for today. We will resume on Monday morning at 10 a.m. sharp, so please try to arrive for 9:30, that we can start at 10 a.m. sharp. And on Monday morning, we will be discussing the appropriations for the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing, and Infrastructure. And if we are able to complete that on Monday, we will then follow that with the Ministry of Health, Sports, Youth, and Culture.
Mr. Chairman, before we close, I just would like to thank the Director of the Policy Coordination Unit, the CFO, the Director of Radio Cayman, Chief Information Officer, and the Cabinet Secretary for attending on Friday afternoon today, late, to assist Finance Committee. I also want to say thanks to all members who have been here for what has been a grueling 2 days, and I do believe that Finance Committee has been provided with a wealth of information with respect to the matters for which I have constitutional responsibility. I'm grateful for members for having participated, and I wish everyone a lovely weekend.
Thank you. We will now adjourn proceedings of Finance Committee until 10 a.m. Monday, the 9th of June, sharp. Thank you.